The Persians called it their last chance, their final army, their final stand, their final opportunity to stop the Muslims before their empire vanished forever. Behind the walls of Nihawand, more than 100,000 Persian soldiers waited. Facing them stood a Muslim commander whose loyalty and courage had earned the respect of an entire generation. Within days, he would win one of the greatest victories in Islamic history, but he would never live to see the celebration. This is the story of Nu'man ibn Muqarrin in the battle that shattered the Persian Empire forever. Long before he would command armies against Persia, Nu'man ibn Muqarrin had already earned something far more valuable than military rank. He had earned a reputation for unwavering faith. Nu'man belonged to the tribe of Muzayna, a people who lived along the routes connecting Medina and Makkah. Among the tribes of Arabia, they would eventually become known for their loyalty to Islam and their steadfastness during some of the most difficult moments in Muslim history. But their story began before the Great Conquest. It began with a decision. One day, Nu'man sat among his brothers and the leading men of his tribe. News from Medina had spread across Arabia. More and more tribes were embracing Islam. The message brought by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was transforming lives, replacing tribal rivalries with brotherhood, and calling people toward justice, mercy, and faith in Allah. The conversation that day carried unusual weight. The men of Muzayna spoke openly about what they had been witnessing. Other tribes were entering Islam. The message was spreading, and they feared being left behind. Nu'man listened quietly. For a moment, he said nothing. Those around him sensed he was thinking deeply. Then he finally spoke. By morning, he said, he would travel to Medina. Anyone who wished to accompany him should prepare. When dawn arrived, Nu'man stepped outside and was met by a remarkable sight. His brothers were ready, hundreds of horsemen were ready, an entire delegation stood prepared to accompany him. Despite difficult conditions and economic hardship, they gathered gifts as a sign of respect and sincerity. Then they set out toward Medina. What happened next became one of the defining moments in the history of their tribe. The delegation arrived in the city of the Prophet ﷺ. Nu'man, his brothers, and hundreds of tribesmen accepted Islam together. The scene was one of genuine joy. The Prophet welcomed them warmly. The companions rejoiced. And the tribe of Muzayna entered Islam, not reluctantly, but wholeheartedly. Years later, that decision would prove extraordinary. Because when many tribes wavered after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, Muzayna did not. They remained firm. They continued praying. They continued paying zakat. They held tightly to the teachings they had embraced. While uncertainty spread across Arabia, their faith remained unshaken. And at the center of that loyalty stood Nu'man ibn Muqarrin. What few people could have imagined at the time was that this same man would one day stand at the head of a Muslim army facing the largest military threat of his life. But before that day arrived, Arabia itself would be tested. The death of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ created one of the most dangerous crises in early Islamic history. Several tribes rebelled, others refused to pay zakat. Some openly challenged the authority of Medina. The Ridda Wars had begun. For Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, the challenge was enormous. The unity of the Muslim community hung in the balance, and the rebellion was spreading rapidly. Among the groups gathering against Medina were powerful tribal confederations who believed the young Islamic State could be pressured into concessions. Their representatives traveled to Medina with demands. They wanted exemption from zakat. If their demands were rejected, they warned, many tribes would abandon Islam altogether. Abu Bakr's response was immediate and uncompromising. Historical sources preserve the essence of his position. By Allah, if they withheld even the smallest obligation they had previously given during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, he would fight them for it. The envoys left furious. The answer was not what they expected. And as they returned to their tribes, another decision began taking shape. If Medina would not yield, perhaps it could be overwhelmed. The threat was real. Abu Bakr recognized it immediately. Precautions were taken. Roads leading into the city were guarded. Defenses were strengthened. The Muslim community prepared for what seemed increasingly inevitable. Then, under cover of darkness, the attack came. The rebels moved toward Medina, hoping to catch the city vulnerable. Instead, they encountered determined resistance. The defenders held their positions. Fighting broke out along the approaches to the city. The attackers were forced back, but the crisis was not over. The rebels remained active. The danger had merely shifted. Abu Bakr understood that waiting would only invite further instability. A counterattack had to come, and when the army was organized, Nu'man ibn Muqarrin stood among its most trusted commanders. The Caliph personally assigned responsibilities within the force. Nu'man was placed in a key position. His brothers also received important commands. Together, they would play a crucial role in the campaign. Before dawn, the Muslim army advanced. As first light appeared across the horizon, they struck. The attack was sudden, powerful, relentless. The rebels struggled to organize themselves. Their lines broke. Many fled the field. Their leader was killed. The threat to Medina was pushed back. It was one of the early victories that helped preserve the unity of the Muslim state, and it further established Nu'man's reputation as a dependable leader under pressure. Yet the challenges facing the Muslims were only growing larger. As the years passed, the Islamic State expanded beyond Arabia. The struggle moved northward, toward Iraq, toward Persia, toward one of the greatest empires on earth. The Sasanian Empire was still powerful. Though weakened by internal conflicts, it remained a formidable military force with vast resources and centuries of experience. Again and again, Muslim armies clashed with Persian forces. Victories were won, territories changed hands, but the conflict was far from finished. One battle in particular changed everything. The Battle of al-Qadisiyah. The Muslim victory there shook the foundations of Persian power. Yet instead of ending resistance, it triggered something else. A final effort, a final mobilization. A final attempt by the Persians to reverse the tide. Reports began reaching Medina. Large numbers of Persian troops were gathering once again. Not hundreds, not thousands, tens of thousands. The empire was assembling another massive army. The news deeply concerned Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. Some reports suggested the Persians were concentrating their strength around Nihawand. Others warned that they intended to launch a major counteroffensive. Whatever the exact plan, one fact was clear: the coming confrontation would be enormous. At first, Umar considered leading the campaign himself. The threat seemed serious enough to justify it, but his advisors urged caution. The Muslim state now stretched across vast territories. The Caliph's presence in Medina remained essential. The discussion continued: who should command the army? Who possessed the courage, judgment, and leadership required for such a mission? The answer gradually became clear. Umar chose Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, the same man whose faith had never wavered, the same man who had stood firm during the Ridda Wars, the same man whose loyalty had been tested time and again. When the decision became known, it was widely supported. Those who knew Nu'man understood why he had been selected. He was respected, experienced, trusted, and perhaps most importantly, he carried himself with humility despite everything he had achieved. Soon afterward, a letter arrived. Its contents were direct. The Caliph instructed Nu'man to advance against the Persian threat and place his trust in Allah. The campaign was beginning. But hidden within that moment was the emotional tension that would quietly follow the rest of the story. Nu'man was about to lead one of the most important battles in Islamic history, a battle that could determine the future of Persia, a battle that could reshape the region forever. Yet destiny was already moving toward him. And neither he nor the men around him fully understood what awaited them on the fields of Nihawand. As scouts rode ahead and preparations accelerated, reports continued arriving from the frontier. The Persians were ready, the Muslims were advancing, and somewhere beyond the horizon, two worlds were moving toward a collision that neither side could avoid. The Persian army was waiting. Behind the defenses of Nihawand stood one of the largest military forces the Muslims had yet encountered in Persia. Years of defeats had pushed the Sasanian Empire into a corner. Cities had fallen, armies had been destroyed, yet the empire refused to surrender. Instead, it gathered its remaining strength. Men arrived from different provinces. Weapons were stockpiled. Fortifications were reinforced. Every indication suggested the same thing. This was intended to be Persia's final great stand. As Nu'man ibn Muqarrin approached the region, he understood the challenge before him. A direct assault against a prepared enemy could prove disastrous. The Persians held strong defensive positions. They wanted the Muslims to attack. They wanted them to pay for every step with blood. And for a time, the battlefield settled into a tense silence. Both armies watched one another, both commanders waited. Neither side seemed willing to make the first mistake. But Nu'man was not only brave, he was patient. And patience often wins battles long before swords are drawn. Soon, reports arrived from Muslim scouts. The Persians had taken extraordinary measures to secure their approaches. Roads and pathways had been obstructed. Hidden hazards had been placed to slow any advance. The enemy wanted complete control over the battlefield. What followed revealed the kind of strategic mind Nu'man possessed. Rather than responding with force, he responded with deception. He instructed selected cavalrymen to approach the area and then deliberately withdraw in a manner that suggested fear and uncertainty. The plan seemed strange, but it served a purpose. The Persians observed what appeared to be a hesitant enemy, an enemy unwilling to commit, an enemy that might be preparing to retreat. Exactly as Nu'man hoped, confidence began to grow within the Persian ranks. The temptation became too great. They wanted to pursue. They wanted to finish what they believed was a frightened opponent. To do that, their own routes would need to be cleared. And so, without realizing it, they began removing many of the obstacles that had protected them. The trap was slowly taking shape, but no one yet realized how costly victory itself would become. As preparations continued, Nu'man gathered his officers and soldiers. The atmosphere within the Muslim camp was different. There was tension, certainly, but there was also conviction. Many of these men had fought together for years. They had crossed deserts. They had survived impossible campaigns. They believed deeply in the cause for which they fought, and at their center stood a commander they trusted completely. As the decisive day approached, Nu'man organized the army carefully. Every unit knew its role. Every commander understood the plan. Then he addressed the men. Historical accounts preserve the essence of his instructions. When the battle begins, he told them, he would raise the takbir 3 times. The first would be a signal to prepare. The second would be a signal to ready their weapons. The third would be the signal to attack with everything they had. The soldiers listened closely. Many would remember those words for the rest of their lives. Then came the morning. The air felt heavy. Thousands of men stood waiting. Armor glinted beneath the daylight. Horses shifted nervously. Across the battlefield, the Persian army stretched across the landscape, an empire fighting for survival. A Muslim army fighting to finish what years of sacrifice had begun. For a few moments, everything seemed still. Then Nu'man raised his voice. Allahu Akbar! The first takbir echoed across the field. Men tightened their grips on their weapons. Ranks adjusted, hearts steadied. A second time, his voice rang out. Allahu Akbar! The army prepared itself. The tension became almost unbearable. Then came the third takbir. Allahu Akbar! And the battlefield exploded into motion. The Muslim army surged forward. What followed was one of the fiercest battles of the Persian campaigns. Lines collided. Steel crashed against steel. The noise became overwhelming. Dust filled the air. Men fought at close quarters where discipline, courage, and endurance mattered more than numbers. Again and again, the Persians attempted to halt the advance. Again and again, the Muslims pushed forward. The struggle became relentless. At times, neither side appeared willing to yield a single step. Bodies covered the ground. The fighting grew increasingly brutal. Veterans who survived the battle would later describe scenes of extraordinary intensity, and throughout it all, Nu'man remained at the front, leading, directing, encouraging, exactly where his soldiers expected him to be. Then came the moment no one had anticipated. Amid the chaos, Nu'man's horse lost its footing. The ground had become difficult and slippery from the violence of battle. The animal stumbled. In an instant, the commander was thrown from his mount. Around him, the battle continued to rage. The noise was deafening. Few even noticed what had happened, but those closest to him immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Nu'man ibn Muqarrin had been mortally wounded. The commander who had carried the hopes of the army was dying. The emotional tension that had quietly followed him since the beginning of our story had finally arrived. The man chosen by Umar, the man who had remained loyal through every trial. The man who had spent his life serving Islam now lay on the battlefield of Nihawand. Yet even in that moment, something remarkable happened. His brother moved quickly. Understanding the danger of panic, he covered Nu'man's body and concealed the news of his death. The army could not afford confusion. Not yet. The battle was still unfolding. The soldiers had to keep fighting, and so they did, unaware that their commander had already met his lord. The Muslim advance continued. The Persian formations began to break. What started as resistance slowly transformed into retreat. Then retreat became collapse. The massive army that had gathered to save the empire could no longer hold. The battlefield belonged to the Muslims. Years of Persian resistance had reached their breaking point. When the fighting finally ended, the scale of the victory became clear. Nihawand was more than a battlefield success. It was a strategic turning point. Many historians would later call it Fath al-Futuh, the Victory of Victories, because after Nihawand, organized Sasanian resistance never truly recovered. The road into the heart of Persia lay open. Yet among the victorious soldiers, another realization was beginning to spread. Something felt wrong. Where was Nu'man? Where was their commander? Where was the man who had led them into battle? Questions moved through the ranks. Faces turned in every direction. Men searched for him. Then his brother stepped forward. The time for concealment had ended. Slowly, he removed the covering. And there, before the victorious army, lay Nu'man ibn Muqarrin. The commander was gone. For a moment, celebration disappeared. The joy of victory gave way to grief. Many soldiers lowered their heads. Others wept openly. Some stood in silence, unable to speak. The man who had led them to one of the greatest victories in Islamic history would never witness its full consequences. But perhaps there was a deeper beauty in that reality. Nu'man had not fought for personal glory. He had not fought for wealth. He had not fought to see his own name remembered. He fought for Allah. And now, at the very moment of triumph, he had received what so many righteous warriors hoped for: martyrdom. The victory remained with the Muslims. The reward remained with Nu'man. News eventually reached Medina. The Muslims rejoiced at the victory, yet their happiness was tempered by sorrow. A great commander had fallen. Another generation of sacrifice had been written into the story of Islam. Still, the outcome of Nihawand changed history forever. The empire that had once dominated the region was broken. The threat that had loomed over the Muslim frontier for years was fading. And at the center of that transformation stood a man whose life had begun among the faithful people of Muzayna and ended on one of the most important battlefields of the 7th century, Nu'man ibn Muqarrin, a leader of faith, a leader of courage, a leader who won one of Islam's greatest victories but did not live to celebrate it. Perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate after nearly 14 centuries. Because it reminds us that true success is not measured only by what we achieve in this world. Sometimes it is measured by the sincerity with which we serve, the sacrifices we make, and the legacy we leave behind. And by that measure, Nu'man ibn Muqarrin achieved a victory far greater than the conquest of a city or the defeat of an empire. He earned the pleasure of Allah, and Allah was pleased with him. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like the video, share it with others, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you'd like to continue exploring authentic Islamic history, subscribe to Islamic Conquests. Until next time, thank you for watching, and may the peace and mercy of Allah be upon you.